I was a park ranger, and there's something malevolent in the deep woods of Maine, by Avatar of Horror. It may surprise you to know that almost 90% of Maine is covered in forests. Even in this modern age, there is true wilderness that hides mysteries to be explored. It's one of the reasons I became a park ranger. The chance to be in the outdoors, to enjoy the wild, untamed wilderness. I know better now. I know better than to explore which should be left alone, and now I warn you. After getting my dream job, I was assigned to a small ranger station up in northern Maine. The area was stunning in its natural beauty. Trees hundreds of years old grew to touch the sky, and rocky terrain led to a wonderful landscape of hills and valleys. Ever since I was a scout as a child, I had imagined being able to enjoy this serenity as my actual job, and here it was in reality. The ranger station was a converted log cabin, which gave me an instant feeling of rustic warmth. Inside, a fire was crackling, and an older man was tending to it. I walked in, hand extended. Hi, I'm the new ranger assigned here. Glad to meet you." I waited in awkward silence and dropped my hand as the man ignored me for a few minutes, before turning around and standing tall. He was a stout and portly man, with graying hair, who looked me up and down before walking away from me and over to a table with a coffee pot. I sat in silence while he poured himself a cup and let the steam rise as he sat down in a large wooden chair. "So you're the new whelp they're sending me." The man took a long drink from his mug. His voice was raspy like he'd smoked a pack of cigarettes a day. Yes, sir. Ranger Parsons, here and ready," I uttered almost giddily. Another silence as the portly man glared at me. "That is way too much energy for this time of day." "Sorry, sir, just excited." "No more of this sir stuff. Name's Hicks, so please use it." He put his mug down and got up from his chair, grabbing his coat off a rack, and gestured for me to follow. Hicks led me to the ranger truck and gestured for me to get inside. "Come on, well, let's get you acquainted with the woods here." We drove in silence for a while, as we navigated the truck through some rough dirt roads, weaving through the thick forest as I admired the beauty of it all. "So, listen up, Parsons. This job is life and death for folks, so you need to be alert and ready at all times." My back unconsciously sat upright and straight. "Yes, Hicks, of course." We arrived at the top of the ridgeline, looking out over a vast swath of forest. Hicks got out and I followed, walking to the edge of where he was standing. The sun was going down, and the red sky made the area look like something out of a painting. My admiration for the natural beauty was broken when Hicks shoved a pair of binoculars in my hand and gestured out to the vista. "From here you can see the 3 fire lookout stations," motioning to the 3 specks of light in the now darkening forest distance. "We'll get you acquainted with the fire watchers, as we've had some issues recently." I dropped the binoculars. "Issues?" Hicks nodded. "Some folk tales tell of something that inhabits these woods that kills or causes people to go missing. All nonsense, of course, but kids and weirdos have been certain it exists and have been combing this place for proof, causing hell and being destructive to the environment." Spooky folk tales were hardly anything new to me. Something? Oh, some such nonsense that started with tales of people going missing in the woods, only to have people swear that they seen them later. The main culprit for this silliness was a group of hikers who were found dead back in the 70s, though I guess there's been tales of similar fates for years before. I admit I swallowed a bit hard. What happened to him? Hicks rubbed his hand on the back of his head, recalling. "Unfortunately, a bear, a big one it seems, had clearly gotten them, as there were claws and bite marks that ripped through them in their tents. Nasty stuff. To this day, we'll get reports of people claiming they saw a bloodied hiker or even an old frontiersman calling out for help, with those who go looking for them not returning." Hicks cleared his throat and his raspy voice returned. "Idiots have come out here littering and almost starting forest fires looking for signs of these ghost people or monsters or whatever they are. Especially ever since that true crime podcast, The Deep Forest, came out about the camping incident and speculating wildly about what really happened." Hicks gestured to get back into the truck, and we began to drive to the ranger station. I'm not familiar with that podcast. Damn thing put this area on the radar of every wackadoo out there and makes our jobs miserable as we often have to go rescue the idiots who don't properly prepare for actual wilderness. I sat and took in what Hicks had said, watching the now dark forest go by, illuminated only by the truck's headlamps. A question. Has anyone actually gone missing after seeing these lost people in the woods? It was a surprise to hear Hicks's hesitation after his otherwise completely dismissal just a few moments before. The woods here are old, very old, and unforgiving for those who don't treat it with respect. People have gone missing, but all can be explained by getting lost or having an unfortunate encounter with wildlife. He sighed and gave a forced laugh. No monsters out here. The next few months were delightfully uneventful, other than the occasional idiot, as Hicks had always called him, getting hurt and needing help. I became friends with one of the fire watchers at Point Alpha by the name of Iris. Her soft voice often called over the radio just to chat at night about the stars, whom she stared at fervently while on her watch. The two other towers checked in but seemed to relish in the isolation, never wanting to engage. Then the day came when a motley group of 6 younger folks made their way up to the ranger station. I say younger as if I'm an old coot, and Hicks was clearly rubbing off on me. Almost all were on their phones casting to TikTok or other social media. The guy leading them was lean and sported a short beard and walked towards Hicks and I while his compatriots streamed their entry to the woods. "You're ready," Hicks's gruff voice mumbled to me. "What brings you here today, son?" he called out to the young man approaching. "Hey there, officers. We're just filing our camping plan," he said, trying to shove some papers in Hicks's hands, but he was not bemused, nodding over to me to take them. "We're not officers, son, we're park rangers. Are you sure you folks are ready for a few days in these deep woods? This place ain't exactly easiest to camp in." The young man looked almost hurt. "That's exactly why we're here, officer. We're doing an on-location episode or a podcast. I'm sure you've heard of it, The Deep Forest." Any hint of amusement now left Hicks. "I see. And what exactly will you be doing out there?" By now a few of their group had walked over to the young man, and the young woman called out, "Josh, everything okay? I want to get some recordings before we set up camp." "Yes, no problems. Just letting the officers know where we're going to be out here." He gestured to the two of us as the young woman took out a small microphone attached to her phone. "Cammy, let's start with these 2 officers. Would you 2 tell us what you know of the mystery of the Deep Forest 7, the campers who met grizzly ends out here in the wilds back in the 70s? Shoving the microphone in Hicks's face. Hicks shot daggers in the girl's direction, who seemed oblivious. "Listen here, dude. Josh, was it? You and your little cohort will respect the rules or I will personally throw you out of these woods. Do not camp within 100 feet of any water source. Do not under any circumstances violate the campfire rules, and I'd better not hear of you all vandalizing these woods. You're expected to return them as pristine as when you went into them. And most importantly, do not dig anywhere." Hicks then turned and walked away back into the cabin, leaving them with me. Well, he was no help. What about you, officer? What strange things have you seen out here? Ever seen any previously missing campers out in the woods? As he said, we're rangers, not officers. Nothing strange here, just beautiful but true wilderness. So be safe out there. The girl previously called Cammy pulled the microphone away. "I think that will be a good intro as we cut to our next segment talking about how the campers thought everything was safe too before being killed." Josh nodded. "Well, hey officer, we'll keep the forest all nice and neat and we'll see you back here in 5 days. There's a special spot we're going to be camping at. Supposedly, it's where the center of the forest is." Jogging back to the others, Josh and Cammy joined the cavalcade of social media posting as they began their journey into the woods. Walking back into the cabin, Hicks was at the coffee pot, as he so often was, shaking his head, muttering idiots over and over. "Parsons, make sure you keep regular patrols, as I have a strong feeling they'll need someone to come save them from skin knees sooner or later. I'm going to head into town for a supply run. Radio me if there's anything out of the ordinary." Something in Hicks's voice was off. It wasn't something I had seen before. Fear. Alone in the ranger cabin that evening, I heard the familiar crackle of static on the radio as the soft voice of Iris came over the line. "Ranger Station, this is Firewatch Alpha. You awake?" A smile came across my face hearing the call as I radioed back, putting down my coffee. "This is Ranger Station. What's your status, Alpha?" "All quiet today, Ranger Station. The sky is clear and you can see a beautiful view of Mercury from up here." "You know, one of these times I'm going to have to come up and take a look through that telescope of yours and see what you see, Alpha." "Ranger Station, is that a proposition? Because this is strictly a solo job up here." "Well, when your assignment ends, then we'll have to meet in person." A giggle came across the radio. "I think we can do that. I'll bring my telescope and..." The line cut to static. "Alpha, I lost you for a second. You still there?" The static buzzed back. "Alpha, this is Ranger Station. Please respond." As only static greeted me. "Iris, are you okay up there?" When the radio came back on, I heard screaming and crying in the background as I shot up. "Ranger Station, this is Alpha. I have an emergency. Please respond." "Alpha, this is Ranger Station. What's going on up there?" "A girl just burst out of the woods to my tower, screaming hysterically and covered in blood. You need to point over here now." "Hold on, Iris. I'm coming." I grabbed my jacket and my first aid kit and hopped into the Ranger truck, revving it at full speed up to the Firewatch tower. The damn idiots, as Hicks called them, must have fallen or done something stupid and gotten hurt. After a tense drive that felt like eternity, I arrived at the base of the tower and headed up the stairs to find Iris holding the girl Cammy I had met previously. Iris gestured to me to come as I rushed forward with my medic kit. "The hell happened here?" I called out, examining the younger girl. Her right arm appeared shattered, hanging and jiggling from the skin and not bone. Slashes across her face and chest gushed blood as I pulled out gauze to hold the wounds closed. "I don't know," Iris called out, trying to shout over the screaming girl. "She ran out of the woods looking like this." As I tried to apply first aid, the girl was wailing and screaming, not from pain, but fear. Over and over she called out, "It killed him! It killed them all!" "What killed who?" I tried to ask as the girl flailed in Iris's arms. Her wounds got worse with each thrashing. I pulled out a benzodiazepine sedative and injected it into her working arm, which slowly calmed the girl as Iris and I both sighed as the moment passed. Over the next half hour, we worked to apply what first aid we could. I radioed for a helicopter medevac, but they won't be here for at least an hour. I looked down at the poor girl, her body battered and broken. I also can't seem to get hold of Ranger Hicks. Just what the hell is going on? Iris wiped off blood from her hands, but it seemed like a futile effort considering it was everywhere else on her. Jesus, what the hell happened to her? Given the slash marks and force trauma, it looked like a bear attack, but we haven't had any reports of one around here in months. Can you stay and look after her until the medevac arrives? I need to go look for her friends, as I'm guessing she was not the only one attacked. Iris nodded, the shock of it all setting in. "Before you go, I need to tell you something." I was halfway out the door, but stopped and turned back around. "The last few nights, I've been seeing something in the dark move out there. I thought I was crazy, but it definitely has been walking around the tower, like it was scoping it out. I didn't say anything as I had no proof, and the eyes play tricks. But after this..." She trailed off, looking at the bloody girl on the floor. I paused, thinking of what to say, and nothing came, and just nodded like that was the solution. It's bare. The marks and the strength have to be one. Iris screamed and fell to her knees. "It wasn't a goddamn bear. There's something out here in these woods. It looked at me. It was watching me. And it clearly got them too." "Just wait for the medevac. The others out there likely need help," I said as I ran down the stairs back to my truck, grabbing the rifle out of the back and heading the direction the girl Cammy was said to walk from. The forest was dense and this would have to be an exploration on foot. The forest had never seemed darker, like the canopy above had wrapped itself over the world and blotted out all light above. Over and over I called out on radio, "Hicks, ick up. Hicks, ick up the goddamn radio," but was met only by silence. The heavy mag light illuminated my path forward as I followed a trail of blood left by Cammy. In the dark, the feeling of a forest path becomes almost infinitely liminal, feeling like you've traveled nowhere and for miles simultaneously. A stretch of blood on the ground led me to the telltale smell of wood burning, and I came to find a campsite. I immediately turned away in abject disgust upon entering the perimeter, as half a human torso was lying on the ground. It was mangled, but the face of Josh was barely attached to the head. Tents were ripped and torn, and at least one more body was lying prone with long claw marks raking its length, with no sign of breath or life. Another was impaled on tree limbs above like it was thrown from the ground. Of the others, I could see nothing. I pulled the rifle off my shoulder, feeling like it was the one thing of control I had in the moment. But I was nothing but terrified, and each step was labored to take moving forward. A twig snapped, and I turned to face the direction of the sound, gun noticeably shaking in my hands. "Hello?" I called out, as if that was a great question in the situation. "Is anyone there?" From behind the tree, a figure fell and thudded to the ground as I rushed over. In the light of my flashlight, the portly frame of Hicks was on the ground, bleeding from a large stab wound in his stomach. "Oh hell, Hicks, what are you doing out here?" as I pulled off my jacket, trying to place it on his wound as he coughed up blood. "I'm sorry, Parsons. I'm so sorry. Couldn't stop it. I followed them and tried to scare them off, but I couldn't stop them." "Stop what, Hicks?" as I saw the extent of the wound which punctured through seemingly to the other side. "What happened?" "These idiots. They disturbed it. They woke it before I could contain it. I tried to stop them, but I was too late. I can't believe they found it. I spent all this time up here trying to keep it hidden, and I failed." "Hicks, you're not making any sense." "This forest is old, ancient old, Parsons. And a being lives here. His primal wrath and anger and violence," he said, coughing up more blood and trying desperately to point to something at the campsite. "The sigil there. It sealed it, and they disturbed it just like the people before." He grabbed my shirt and pulled me forward. "It's going to kill every human in this forest now that it's free. You need to get out of here," he said as a cloud of blood spattered out, and Hicks's breath stuttered to a halt as his eyes sank back, with his body going limp. I think I held the Hicks's lifeless body for a good 20 minutes before coming back in myself, and finally laying him down on the ground. Finally standing up, I walked to the area Hickson pointed to in his last moments. The ground was rough and torn, with dirt and leaves and sticks showered everywhere. Running my hands through the disturbed soil, a stone effigy of a face was buried in the ground. As I ran my hands over it, more of the stone carving presented itself. It was a carved face made out of leaves. The visage was terrible, and it gave me revulsion upon viewing it. It cracked down the center as I tried to refocus on it, as something was pooling out of the cracks. I touched it and pulled my fingers into the light to see fresh red blood oozing from the ground, like the forest itself was bleeding. My examination stopped when I heard a scream in the distance and darted away from the campsite towards the sound. The scream I heard was human, and I heard the telltale whimpering of someone in pain. I pushed through the forest brush trying to make my way towards the sounds, and when I showed my light, I saw one of the young girls from the group before. She was bloodied and crying in agony. I shouldered my rifle and tried to come to her aid. "Hold on, I'm coming," I called out. The phrase reminded me to check if I still had any first aid supplies, and the moment of hesitation saved my life. Claws the length of my arms slashed out in front of me, slashing across my face as the girl had vanished, and I fell backwards, trying to regain my balance. Looking back up, a form stared down at me, sharing the same look of the stone figure buried before. A face of leaves with eyes of burning ember shone out, as if it peered into my very soul. The long-bladed limbs slashed down at me as I rolled aside from the blow, grabbing my rifle and wildly firing upwards. I'm no marksman, and whether out of luck or skill, a shot hit its face and the creature screamed an inhuman howl. I wasn't going to press my luck and ran. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, dropping the rifle by accident, but I couldn't look back. I didn't know where I was running in the dark as I just pushed forward, my heart pumping to the extreme, with only the flashlight shining ahead. I hit a tree as I ran and fell, tripping over myself, crashing into the dirt. Picking myself up, I found I was in a clearing, one that I had never seen in the woods before. All along the perimeter, thick trees seemed to have grown to gargantuan proportions. On every tree there were faces, human faces that screamed in eternal agony, encased in the bark of the massive trunks. There were hundreds, thousands of faces, all screaming to the empty darkness of the forest. Behind me, I heard lumbering footsteps as the creature had found me. It moved in the darkness of the trees. Wherever my light showed, it faded and appeared elsewhere. It made not words, but sounds that triggered something mnemonic in me. Something in me from when the first mammals appeared on the planet. It was the sound of being hunted. With nothing left to fight with, I made my way through the trees with faces and into the deep forest yet again. Behind me, like a breath of death that clung to my neck, I could feel the creature's claws closing in on me. Then I heard it, the sound of rotors. Changing direction, I darted over brush and bramble, trying to get closer to the sounds. I heard my heart in my ears as I ran. With every step, the rustle of leaves came closer. I didn't even notice what had happened at first until I hit the ground. The adrenaline and shock kept me conscious before the searing pain of being cut across my back finally hit me. It was not just the pain of being cut open, of nerves and blood spraying forward. No, it was the feeling and violence, as if such a thing could be quantified, stabbing into me. Whatever the thing was wanted so hard for me not to just be cut, but to feel agony, and it succeeded. I fell and heard the rush of rotors, and time seemed to stop for me. I was doomed now. I was so close to escape, and it was all for naught. The forest itself seemed to delight in my pain, as if the blood cascading from my back nourished the ground floor, scoring on the crimson ichor flowing from my body. My eyes blinked for a moment as suddenly the dark forest was illuminated. A flare. From where I could not see, but the last thing my conscious mind remembered was seeing a person standing, aiming a weapon at the thing behind me. My world faded into darkness. I awoke in a hospital bed, my sense of time lost. My body was bandaged to the point I looked like I was about to receive a royal burial in a pyramid. Over the next few days, I was interviewed by the local police, the FBI, and I'm sure half a dozen other agencies whose questions I could give no answer to. I had learned the medical crew had found the girl Cammie in the watch station badly beat up, but she appears to have survived, though in a near catatonic state. The other members of the Deep Woods podcast were either dead or missing. The news media had a feast at the story, with wild speculation, but it was all chalked up to a bear attack as it had been before. Of Iris there was no trace. The fire watcher was missing, along with the others presumed to have been gotten at by the wild bear. A massive search and rescue was initiated, but no survivors were found. When I was well enough to walk, I went with a search party. Their gaze on me hoped I had some further secrets to reveal. I took them first to the Blay campground to search for the stone face of leaves buried in the ground, but it had disappeared. My fingers became bloody as I clawed into the dirt trying to find it, to no success. I then spent the next few weeks in the woods trying to find the clearing in the woods with the faces in the trees. Every drone survey to guides said no such place existed. Eventually I was deemed broken, mad even. My explanations became more evidence it was just a bear attack, because of their objective absurdity. I had become nothing more than a joke, and the incident was slowly forgotten. I was in the woods yesterday, staring into the dark thicket, when I heard a voice. It was soft and calm, and I followed it. I followed it to a clearing I did not recognize, and in the center, Iris stood. In her hand was an orange flare gun, and her clothes were ripped and torn. Her hair was wreathed in leaves, and her jaw was unhinged, and slash marks were down her body. She stared at me with burning ember eyes. She stared at me with the rage and wrath of the forest. Heavy Breathing by Space General America. been 3 days since we broke into that house. I think it's finally caught up to me. Mick thought it would be easy. The owner of the house had died 2 days ago. It was some old guy, Dominic or some shit. I didn't know what his name was, and I don't care. I hope he's burning in hell for this. I hope he isn't waiting for me. Back to Mick. He was always the one to scout it out for Tom and me. Look, we didn't choose to be thieves. It kinda happened. We needed money and other junk, right? Everyone does. It's not our fault. We just got good at it and couldn't stop. So anyway, Mick told us about this place. Old guy dies alone, no family shows up, it's in a quiet neighborhood, easy pickings. How could we not say yes? I didn't feel anything when I saw the house. It was this big, rustic mansion, or some kind of castle. I don't know what it is. I'm not an expert on houses. It was just this single house standing alone and empty. Windows were intact, doors as well. Looked like it was just waiting for anyone. I keep replaying one part of that night in my head, over and over. We were going in through the back door. Tom was going to pick the lock, but the instant he stuck the pin in the keyhole, the door just slid open. I thought it was Tom, who was kneeling there, confused, that his tinkering had made the door open. But the door opened so smoothly, like it was, I don't know, automatic, or when you open your mouth without thinking. That kind of smooth. They couldn't have wanted us to go inside. That'd be just as crazy as why I'm writing this. That house was pretty damn cold. That was the first thing I noticed when we went inside. How cold it was. I mean, that was normal. Nobody's been living there for 2 days. Shit gets that old. But God, it felt like solid ice was being drained over our skin. I think we all had the same idea, that we had to make this quick. We searched the house room by room. First was the living room. Nothing too special about it. Found a quarter under a carpet. The date on it was 1958 and it looked pretty old. Maybe I could pawn it off. Tom found a book of some kind, but he didn't take it with us. I had just put the coin in my pocket when I saw him standing by the bookshelf holding this big black tome of some kind. He had it open, in profile of me, and was scrolling through the pages. The look on his face caught me off guard. Tom isn't the squeamish type. I'd seen this man outright strangle a dog to death. Had to be done, I swear it had to. It would have woken the owners. But as he kept flipping through the pages, his eyebrows were pushing down over his eyes like a shield. I asked him what he was reading, and his face shot up from the book like someone had just stepped out of the wall. His eyes were wide, his shoulders were rising and falling with every breath he took, and I think one of his hands was shaking. He shut the book without a word, threw it to the other side of the room, and told me it was worthless. I asked him what was in it, but he just pushed me out of the living room. Mick was going to pick up the book when Tom snapped at him to hurry his ass up, and I mean snapped, like he was going to break someone in two. Mick did as Tom said, but Tom kept glancing over his shoulder after he went to the next room, and the next, and the next. Something about that book had scared him. I don't know what. When we reached the bedroom, we finally made payday, and I mean payday. When we opened up one of the dressers, it was full of tin cans, and every one was cash. Coins or bills and denominations up to 100. Mick was laughing his ass off as he began stuffing shit into a bag, saying how he was going to buy some hookers and blow the rest on cocaine. Tom was standing by the door, looking into the hallway. I asked if he wanted anything, and he said we'll divide it up tomorrow. I was about to look under the bed when something white slithered over the wall. My heart skipped a beat, then I went cold. That had been a car's headlights, I was sure. I crouched down and crept to the window, peeking outside. The houses were all lined up in a neat little mismatched row. Street lamps were vomiting white light and the road was empty. There wasn't even a faint red glow of a tailgate. I told the guys we should probably hurry it up. Mick got a bit ticked, asking why the fuck we needed to do that. And when I told his dumb ass because someone had just driven past, he went pale and asked if it was the cops. Then Tom told both of us to grab whatever was left so we could leave. And then something moved upstairs. All three of us looked up at the ceiling, mouths wide open. I'm not sure what we expected to see, but it wasn't the white peeling plaster or the bricks that were peeking through. Mick asked what the hell that was. I said it was probably some box that had been left in the attic, but I don't think I believed it. Tom just told us to grab the cash and go. We did without asking another question, even Mick. As I left the bedroom, for a moment I thought I saw something. On the ceiling, like a puffy white disc or mask. But when I stared right at it, nothing was there. I realized what had happened. The way the moonlight hit it, it looked like a face. That had to be it. Had to be. We were heading back to the car when Tom stopped and spun around, looking at the house. I asked him what was up, even trying to see if I could spot what had him so nervous, but he just shook his head and mumbled about the wind. He kept mumbling about the wind as we drove back to the apartment complex. Now that I think about it, he wasn't mumbling about the wind. The really weird crap started up the next day. I called up Mike to ask if I should bring the loot over, but he didn't want to talk about that. He said that Tom wasn't answering his phone. Asked if I'd seen him. I said I hadn't, and I asked if we should go check out his place. Mike said yes, so we did. Tom's place was just empty. Everything was exactly as it had been when we'd left it last night, but it was like it had been that way for years. I can't explain why, it just felt that way. Empty like a tomb. We searched all over the place and couldn't find any sign of Tom. That's what I told Mike anyway. What I found was his phone. He'd left a message on it, a recording. I pressed play when I got home, and the video starts with Tom shining a flashlight down his hallway. He was breathing really heavy, or at least I thought he was. He kept scanning the whole damn thing, trying to find heads or tails of whatever the hell he was looking for. I don't know. He just kept breathing into the phone. Then, right as the video ended, something appeared on the wall. This white puffy disc, Tom screamed for a moment, but the heavy breathing didn't stop. The video went on for another 7 hours or so until it stopped. The next day I was going to show it to Mike, but he called me first. Said something was wrong, that someone had broken into his house, and he could hear them breathing. I told him to get out, but he said he wasn't no pussy, that he'd take care of it. That was what he said, he wasn't no pussy. And he kept talking. I began to realize something wasn't right. I asked if he was all right. He said yes, and I could tell he was lying. I said I was about to come over when he screamed, then stopped. Like 1 minute he was there, then just gone. I said his name, and it was like talking into a void. I called out his name, begged him to answer me, asked if he was all right. Then I heard something, real faint, beginning slowly louder, and a little closer. I can hear it now, getting just a bit closer. Heavy breathing. I wished the dogs would be quiet, until they were. By Entropy Kid. I'm packed and ready to leave, so I've got some time to write all this down. Grandpa's talking with the 2 trucks that just pulled up, still waiting on the last one. Then we're headed north. For now, I've got time to kill. I was meant to do this, and it's officially now or possibly never. Fair warning, this is a long one, folks. 8 pages. Buckle up. And if anyone in East Texas wants to tag along, message me. We're taking as many people as we can get. My hands stuck down to the pillow on my head. It didn't help. This was the 3rd night in a row they were unhinged in the tree lines, and my room at the end of the double-wide trailer put me right beside their ceaseless barking. I peered to my left as my thumb unlocked the iPhone screen on the nightstand. 1:30 a.m. I thought how I'd asked my dad about kenneling them on the porch, knowing he'd give me some excuse about them being necessary for our home. The first line of defense, our protectors, our alarm system. Looking back, we should have realized it then. To their credit, Daisy and Rose excelled at their duty. All manner of interloper received a billowing cascade of howls and barks on our property. I thought how scared a single raccoon, possum, or coyote must have felt when the sisters barreled into the tree line at them, shattering the peace of the night. The shadows that trailed through the woods gave every impression that there were more than 2 guards. None stayed to find out. They often startled me awake when the pair flew off the porch in an eruption of sound. My room filled one corner of the trailer pointing east towards our driveway, the forest a dozen yards beyond. My uncle and cousins hand-built the pine porch that I unfortunately shared a wall with. I had no bed frame, my mattress on the floor next to my stubby, short nightstand. Over the years, I'd learned the pattern of footsteps both inside our trailer and the outside porch. I could feel them. The heavy boot-clad stomps of my father, the dainty steps of my little sister, the multiple light paws as the girls returned from driving off a would-be invader. I could identify everyone by their steps. The dog's normal process was broken these last few nights. Normally, once an intruder was identified, one of them would sound off. The second would answer the call, affirming backup. Together, they would drive with speed and resonant fury towards the enemy. They charged the trees. The interloper fled. The night returned to peace. We never had more than one incident per night, though it was always jarring when it occurred. This was different. For 3 nights straight, Daisy and Rose came alive with activity as soon as the evening dusk gave way to full darkness. They slept during the day now, not naps, deep, full sleep to regain their strength from the prior patrol. Then, together they prowled the edge of the black woods. Low growls and occasional half-grunts ran the full duration of the night. More than once they would erupt in blistering, synchronized anger, but eventually returned to their tense surveillance. There were no more one-off encounters ended with a blitzkrieg of furious intimidation. It was hourly now, consistent. Whatever they drove off kept coming back. I rolled onto my back and stared at the lightly luminescent sticky stars on the ceiling. My baby sister and I had found a bag of them at the local dollar store, and my father always melted under the combined pressure of his daughters. We initially agreed to split the bag between our rooms, but after putting up half in mine, she insisted we needed them all to make a real night sky. She slept in my room for a week straight after that, together looking at our tapestry of glimmering plastic, our own little universe. I stared at them as the barking pushed further away, me silently hoping they'd continue into the distance for the remainder of the late hours so I could get some sleep. This is when my life changed forever. At first, I thought my exhausted mind played a trick. Reminiscing about building galaxies with my sister had pulled me away from reality, and the sharp, distant yelp brought me back. I sat up in my bed, held my breath, ears perked. The still far barking became high-pitched, strained, desperate. It was coming closer, and most notably, it was alone. At 15, I was probably too old to still wear the pink My Little Pony pajamas my aunt had gotten me for Christmas, but they were just too comfy. Clothed feet slid into loose flip-flops as I stood to make my way to the door. There was no doubt in the second yelp, followed by a hyper-stuttered half-bark, half-squeal. Much closer than before, practically in our driveway. It strained, struggled, then ended abruptly. For the first time in 3 nights, I finally got what I wanted, and it filled me with dread. Silence. I opened my door at the same time my little sister opened hers. Her 10-year-old frame peeked nervously around the edge of her white door across from mine, eyeing me over the small gap that separated our rooms and led to the kitchen. Before either of us could step onto the 5-feet-long, 4-feet-wide landing of carpet that separated us, my father's shadow burst into the kitchen, shotgun in hand. "Stay in your rooms, lock your doors," he commanded mid-stride. My mother's smaller frame quickly waddled behind him in a purple nightgown. He hit the front door with force. My room rattled as the wood slammed against the outer wall. I felt his steps hurriedly descend the 5 porch stairs and vanish into the drive. The glow from the now lit overhead porch light illuminated a single yellow square from the front door's window. The light had stretched down onto the linoleum to my right, just past the dining table, and landed next to the little gap between our rooms. Maud's shadow appeared in it a moment later, and I heard every lock we had latch beneath worried fingers. "Mommy?" my little sister asked with a child's innocence. Neither of us moved from our respective door cracks. Mom rounded the corner, hurried fingers fumbling with her phone. "It's okay, Melissa. It's going to be okay," she said. She lied. It's hard to describe that square of light on the kitchen floor next to me, how it's burned into my memory. The front door was just around the corner from my room. It would be easy to take 2 rights and walk straight outside, to see the situation with my own eyes, to no longer linger in that tense confusion. I would not be able to see anything from the only window in my room, which faced south on the long side of the trailer. Curiosity began to get the better of me, but I stayed. Mom walked into my sister's room, attempted to comfort her and guide her back to sleep. As the oldest, I received no such consideration, though I stood there a long while as if expecting it. I could see their shadows moving inside Melissa's room, could hear their worried whispering. My heart sank when I felt the first step of the porch bend downward. The thought of it being my father vanished as the weight warped and popped the boards underneath its mass. My breathing halted again, but this time not by choice. Instinct froze me in place, paralyzing everything. A second, heavy footstep cracked the third board, completely skipped the second. I stared at that golden square of light next to me. Anticipation and fear grew in equal amounts. The fifth porch step protested next. The boards buckled and twisted beneath monstrous weight. The contrast is what haunts me the most, I think. The shadows of my loving mom and sweet sister in darkened, half-lit gloom across from my door. The hairy black shape that grew into the yellow square shining on the kitchen floor. I could see both, practically one in each eye. Comfort and love, unknown and horror. Things I cherished and a thing I feared. Even from the silhouette I could tell the hair was coarse and all-encompassing. A large cone-shaped head rose from wide shoulders. I couldn't tell if it had a neck. Not much taller than my father, yet horrifyingly heavier. It faced through the window, unable to see any of us from the unlit kitchen and around the Sharfa owner. Luckily, we had turned on no other lights, but I wasn't sure if I could hear their muffled conversation, as quiet as it was. I found some courage at that, slowly opened my door wider, prepared to sneak over to them and lock ourselves inside Melissa's room together. I heard a guttural, low growl, and somehow I knew it was annoyed. It turned to its side, looked up. The shadow of its face was long, too long. What looked like large eyebrows fell into a flat nose, and a jaw that extended well down to its chest. I couldn't see the rows of teeth therein, but I knew they were there. I couldn't think of a single large animal with a large oval-shaped head like that. Not even a mythical one. With the twin sounds of a small grunt and glass breaking, the light from the porch vanished. The kitchen plunged back into near-complete darkness, taking the yellow square with it. I heard my mom and sister pause, finally aware that something was out there. If they tried to look now, it would see them. I had to prevent that. My foot lightly touched the carpeted space between our doors. The entire trailer shook with a violent impact and a deafening primitive roar. The front door slid past on the kitchen floor, buckled in the center and nearly split in half. Hinges, locks, glass, and splinters flew like insects. They ricocheted and clattered off every surface. Hanging lights and closed blinds swung as the entire trailer rocked on its foundation. Instantly I moved, without thought, without choice. Somehow, I knew this was my one chance, a desperate and reactionary motion. To use this momentary chaos to mask my actions, a storm of sound to cover my own. I grasped my sister's door handle and slammed it shut, instantly retreated into my own room in the same motion and slammed mine as well. Only then did I register the massive bloody footprint on the crumpled front door. I sat on the floor, back against the plain wooden door that would not save me. My breathing became a ragged mess, shallow and still too noisy, even with both hands lashed over my mouth. Head was dizzy, ears thumped from the heavy dose of adrenaline my brain flushed into every corner of my body. Yet, even then, the only clear thought that repeated in my mind was the desperate plea for my mother and sister not to scream. That thought scattered as a new material twisted and cried nearby, linoleum. A single titanic foot crushed glass and tile underneath. Heavy, deep sniffs filled the kitchen with more curiosity than anger. Maybe we would be lucky, and a hungry nose would lead it to the pantry near the front. Maybe it would leave after gorging itself on potatoes, bread, and apple cinnamon toast crunch. I waited. Cool beads of sweat formed on my skin, back still pressed against the bedroom door. To their credit, my mother and sister could have vanished for all the sound they made. The second step bent the floor again as it fully entered our home. I considered running them. This was my best chance. I glanced at the trophies on the shelf, some toppled from the earlier impact. Most earned as the starter for the track and field relay race team, with a few from various cross-country meets. I was fast, surely faster than that huge thing. If I went now, I'd be within arm's reach of it only briefly, but the element of surprise was on my side. I could run straight through the trailer and head out the back door in the laundry room. It didn't know the layout inside. Another advantage. This was the best time to lead it away. Then I could surely outrun the massive monster once I got it outside, right? My budding confidence exploded in the same manner the dining table did. It slammed against the kitchen cabinets like a comet, shattering countertops, drawers, and itself in the process. It had taken both my father and uncle to move that heavy oak table up the porch steps and fandangle it at the door. 2 men to move it, and this thing just... The muffled sound from my sister's room might as well have been a signal flare. The monster paused, enveloped itself in a hunter's silence. It, like me, held perfectly still. The single, accidental sob of a frightened 10-year-old girl ended as fast as it came. I eyed my trophy rack, now considered which would be the best to stab an eye, or wedge down an open throat. Even in my terror, if it went for my family, I would go down fighting to protect them. My hands glistened with sweat. The greenish light that my fake galaxy above reflected from them filled me with a faux bravery, a misplaced confidence to fight monsters with no training, no ability, and most importantly, no actual weapon. I'd need to improvise. If I could, fast. It was so fast. The monster moved with a speed unbefitting its weight. With 2 massive strides, it was between our doors. This time the feet were maddeningly quiet, impossibly quiet. It did not keep the momentum through their door. Instead, it paused on the small carpeted gap. I felt it lower itself, squatted into a crouch. Its breath was heavy, invasive. Horrible nostrils pulled at the air between us, and it waited. Quiet, patient. Again, I realized the only thing between me and it was an inch of hollow wood. My lungs halted completely when it rushed, but the rancid smell of its oily hide entered my nose anyway. My eyes watered, small tears formed in the corners. Dear God, please. It was huddled right behind me. I stared at my short nightstand and my phone. It seemed miles away. All my confidence, all my internal bravado gone. Someone save me. Please, God, don't let us be torn apart by this monster. I considered crawling for the phone, but I knew I could never do so without alerting it. I could picture that long face on the other side of my door, crouched low with matted hair atop powerful meat. Layers of primal muscle coiled into piles of potential violence, waiting for one of its victims to lose their composure. I wondered if it felt pleasure in that. Headlights pierced the edges of my south-facing window blinds. The sound of parting gravel heralded the approach of a large vehicle. Uncle Rick's Silverado had to be. He only lived a mile up the road. That's right. My mother had her phone with her. My cousin James was on leave from the military. He'd be with him for sure. A sensation of relief rose in me. Briefly. I knew when it noticed them. Its long breaths paused with realization. I felt its massive weight turn, still crouched next to me. Its bulk brushed against my door, hinges strained as it pushed inwards toward my back. That almost broke me. It stayed there, still low and waiting. It had to know I was here. It had to. Its breathing resumed, now much lighter and nasally, but still long. I planted my palms slowly and silently into the carpet with one of its inhales, trying to mask my movement. I rooted my trembling limbs to the floor, tried to prevent them from shaking the wood behind me. God, we were leaning against the same door now. 3 distinct slams echoed outside, an extra person I didn't expect. Good. A mumbled conversation grew even closer. Sudden terror gripped me as they approached the door. I realized it was waiting. I had to warn them. I had to tell them it was in here. But how? My heart raced with the surety that they were walking into an ambush. A horrifying awareness dawned on me then. Knowledge of the beast's intelligence. Knowledge that only I possessed. Knowledge that more of my family walked into danger. I could scream, but it would kill me before any help could make it to me. I could run, try to jump through the window. It would take the monster a few moments to realize, and I would be able to warn my uncle outside. But if the glass didn't break, it would be through the door and rip me to shreds before anyone even got inside. I could sneak for the phone, the monster paying more attention to the men approaching now. But that was an assumption, a dangerous one. considering it continued to lean against the same door as I did. The voices paused outside. The monster's breath matched. Silent moments passed, then the first boot hit the wooden step. It apprehensively approached the darkened, shattered doorframe on the porch. It was horrifying how lightweight that boot was. 2 others ascended behind the first, 3 men in total. I could picture the raised rifles in front of scanning eyes, unsure if there was even a threat left, wondering if it was a bear or a mountain lion, none of them dreaming of the monstrously strong beast awaiting them inside, ready to strike. I was running out of time. They were all gonna die. We were all going to die. The first steps made it to the doorframe. Uncle Rick's voice whispered, "Holy shit." His boot crunched the shattered glass as he entered our kitchen cautiously. The monster took a deep, quiet inhale. Lungs filled with fuel to slaughter my family. Chills ran down my back in waves. Coldness gripped all my organs. Every pulse filled with ice. Tears ran freezing trails down my cheeks. My teeth gritted in frustration. I looked up at the viridescent stars, thought of my sister. Hands clenched into trembling fists. Numbness filled my muscles. But I made my choice. I screamed. Looking back, I think I watered to say words, but they were panicked and flighty. I just remember my voice felt as a volcano in the Arctic, a rush of heat exploding out in defiance of the cold embracing every inch of me. A piercing, agonized screech of utter and complete fear birthed into the night air. The monster met my scream with a bellow of its own. It's ironic how some emotions permeate every language, even in nature. The staggered wail was not of anger at its plan being foiled, nor was it joy at one of its victims finally losing their composure during the hunt. It roared in pure, unadulterated shock. A hole appeared next to my head a second later. An explosion of splinters and anger entered my dim green galaxy. Large gray fingers uncoiled from the fist they were a moment before, the claws black and dirty, slick with blood still. Red, mangy hair covered the back of the hand and the entire forearm. The monstrous palm opened and swung inward toward my head. My entire body hit the ground in a curled ball. There were no more plans. There was nothing else I could do. I had cast the die now. I did all I could do. 2 of its fingers found purchase in the loose fabric of my pajamas. Panic racked my everything as they curled into a grip. I pressed my back to the bottom of the door, screamed again. This time I was answered by a gunshot. Most people only know guns from movies. You see the hero shooting his pistol in a stairwell or a tight corridor or a submarine, and then they have conversations with ease. Guns are not quiet. The first blast inside the trailer rattled my skull and replaced most of the sounds with a constant ringing. Though even that consistent, monotone chime didn't overtake the pained screech of the monster as its back hit my sister's door. Though my hearing was hampered, and I dared not look through that hole, I could piece together some of what happened from the vibrations communicated through the trailer's floor. Mumbled shouts, more boots, the kitchen filled with challengers. The monster charged, its gate too large, too fast. It was on them. Gunshots pierced the ringing, made it worse. The floor trembled with collisions en masse. The wall beside me rattled with an impact. A weight thudded to the floor. It scampered and rose, returned to the fight. Dishes and glass shattered, cabinets warped, chairs broke, as did bones. Gunshots gave way to fevered screams and anguished roars. I hoped my warning had saved someone, anyone. Please say it helped. My trembling increased as the brawl ended. Newly gifted tinnitus masked the victor, and the floor had become depressingly silent. The only vibration was an odd random shake that paused in irrational intervals. I rose slowly to peer through the hole in my door. What little I could see of the kitchen was destroyed, nearly every inch slicked in bright blood. The metallic tinge overwhelmed my nostrils. A large bloody splotch adorned the ceiling, red handprints on either side. One tan work boot laid on the counter, with 2 jagged, splintered bones still in it. Cabinets hung from the wall or were missing entirely, and a destroyed stool lay in a heap on the stovetop. Mangy red form rose from the other side of the small island, coarse, ragged hair now matted in blood. It faced away from me, twisted and jerked. A horrifying rip pierced the ringing in my ears. The monster dropped something heavy on the kitchen floor. It landed with a flat, permanent thump. It rose to its full height slowly, and I could see its long gray jaw move as it chewed. Yet it seemed to wobble, reeled slightly. For the first time of the night, its footing felt unsure. As it turned back towards me, I ducked in realization. A promise from before, a vendetta not finished. It had won, and now it was time for revenge on the small creature that startled it. That ruined its crafty ambush, was to blame for every bit of damage and pain it felt now. I returned to my ball, this time with complete hopelessness. Panic overtook me, sobbing tears now a constant fight to keep silent. It was going to kill me, I was sure. It was going to eat me. The massive foot landed with wetness, blood so thick on the kitchen floor I could actually feel it. A second, less sure step landed after that, but, to my surprise, it was headed toward the front door. It staggered, planted full weight behind each exhausted step. One footfall crunched glass near the doorway, then heavy knees collapsed down into tile. It held there a moment, then toppled forward, shaking the outer porch with the bulk of its torso landing with no resistance. Half inside, half outside, its ragged breaths large enough to vibrate through the floor now. Then, stillness. I waited, out of fear, shock, disbelief. My mind raced as the weight of loss finally caught up to it. My dad, uncle, cousin. This wasn't supposed to happen to people, to entire families. After a minute, I found my resolve as my rational mind regained control. I crawled to my phone on the nightstand. I palmed it in sweaty, quivering hands. My back leaned against the wall, the porch steps just on the other side. Waited for it to rise, to continue its rampage. But it didn't. A sob brewed as I looked at the family photo on my phone's background. Typed the password in as pained witness blurred the numbers. Exhaustion and anguish finally breaking the levee that held them this long. I can't describe the feeling when that solid, heavy foot crunched into the second porch step. Oh God. My hands moved in a blur, the message clear and direct. I stared at "Don't move" until it confirmed as sent. Quietly, I prayed Mom would see it fast. The new monstrous feet climbed the stairs and paused in front of the first beast in our doorway. Impossibly, another set ascended after that. Two more. My screen lit up, a message from my mom. "Where are you?" Before I could type, twin roars rattled the wall I leaned against. Primal, guttural, yet somehow more human. They continued for a solid minute. Each paused only briefly, but never at the same time. Eventually, they faded back into silence. My ears returned to a single constant ring. Maybe they had descended into quieted grunts I was unable to hear. Maybe even tears. The weight of the dead one lifted with terrifying ease, and the two creatures descended the steps of the porch and back into the night. It was finally over. Mom and I texted back and forth. I told her to call 911, and I would stay put and warn her if those things came back. Even though I couldn't hear much, I could feel. And I was too close to this wall to risk calling for help myself. I couldn't hear well enough to speak with the dispatcher anyway. She texted me back that she had reached several family members and the police were already on the way. Looking back, she made the right choice. If she had panicked and called herself, we'd all be dead. A half hour went by before I had the courage to move to Melissa's room. I was finally sure they were gone. My mom sobbed uncontrollably as she hugged me tighter than she ever had. I told her and my sister not to go out there. They didn't need to see any of that. Neither protested. Even traversing the tiny gap between our rooms scarred my heart forever. James's body was crumpled against the end of the island, one arm missing at the shoulder. Both orbital sockets were placed with long, horizontal gash. His bottom jaw hung by one joint, unfortunately the one furthest from me. I got to see how few teeth remained in there. Didn't see my uncle or whoever the third person was. I didn't want to. I didn't want to go look for my dad or Daisy or Rose. I shut the door to the carnage, retreated in with my mom and sister, crouched in the corner with them. Fear, grief, and injustice felt in silence for so long finally received voices. We bawled in huddled anguish, the pain of living, the guilt of surviving. We wept in Victoria's misery. It's been 1 year. 3 things happened after that night. My baby sister lives with Mima in Seattle. My mother hasn't been sober since, and I've spent every day at Grandpa Murphy's. My father's father, a retired sheriff, military vet, and self-proclaimed gun nut. He's taught me everything about them. Shooting, cleaning, sighting, calibrating. He got me a Remington 20 gauge shotgun for my 16th birthday. I'm ready to put it to use. I suppose you want to know the count. Everyone does. Dad was dead. I didn't hear how, didn't care to. My Uncle Rick, my cousin James, and one of his military friends. Feel bad I forgot his name. All closed like casket funerals. All heroes I never got to thank. Braving something monstrous and violent while I hid away, worthless and pathetic, laying in a ball as they died. Every single night I hear it breathing next to me. Every single night. I get to relive the screams, hear them die, feel them die. I lay there every time, doing nothing. Maybe something as simple as grabbing its leg would have saved one of them. Maybe stabbing it with a relay race trophy could have saved them all. But that little girl so afraid to die that night did. I'll never be helpless again. I dropped out of school after that. They had me on several medications I've stopped taking. They took the edge off, made me dull. I've been training with Grandpa. Even in retirement, he's maintained his fitness, still able to march up and down mountains on his bi-monthly hunting excursions I've been joining him on. We've practiced with rifles, small arms, close quarter fighting, and several months of Krav Maga. The last one is more for fitness and good for a young lady to know, Grandpa says. He always apologizes to me, says he wishes he could have been there. I do too, but he shouldn't feel that guilt. It wasn't his fault. There was a triple homicide somewhere east of Livingston. Being an ex-sheriff has its perks. Grandpa said to pack light. That's code for we will be moving a lot. It's finally time. My preparation is about to pay off. I'm taking my 2 favorite pistols, the Sig Sauer P320 and my Desert Eagle. I named them Daisy and Rose. Fitting, ironic, poetic, call it whatever you want. This all started with a daisy and a rose barking in the night. It's going to end that way too. Urgent message. For traveler info, tune in to 1680 AM by $. I never was the type to go on road trips, but when my friend invited me to go on a fishing trip to Arkansas, I told him I was down to go. I'd been fishing since I was a little boy when my dad first taught me how to cast my bait, and I've always dreamed of catching big trout in Arkansas. The camp we will be staying in is called Newlands. We're aiming to leave late Saturday. The time we leave all depends on my dad, Jude told me. I found it strange that we were leaving late because the drive there will be 8 hours. I guess in my mind it made sense because the later you stay out, the less traffic there would be. So, on Friday night I packed up my things and slept in late in the afternoon. When Jude and his father came to pick me up, I kissed my parents goodbye and said I loved them. I woke up about halfway through the car ride. Through my tired and blurry vision, I was able to make out the words on a road sign because of our headlights reflecting off of it. Urgent message. For traveler info, tune in to 1680 AM. That's an interesting sign, I said tiredly to Jude. Yeah, it's weird. I wasn't there the last time we came, Jude replied. Jude's father tuned into the AM channel without saying a word. At first there was silence. The silence was loud and eerie. And then a staticky voice of a woman began playing. Warning, do not fall asleep. They're here. Reports of river crawlers seen in Arkansas. From the hours 10 p.m. to 12 a.m., do not fall asleep. Do not look outside. If you hear scratching in the ceiling, do not look up. Lock your doors. If someone is knocking on your door from the hours previously mentioned, do not open your door. If you hear screaming from outside your cabin, do not go outside. If someone leaves your cabin at the hours mentioned previously, do not let them in until lockdown has been lifted. In the case where something from outside breaches your cabin, lock yourselves inside a room and turn off the lights. Stay tuned in for updates. The message ended. The car was left in silence. Was that real? Jude broke the silence, but was cut off abruptly. Boys, as long as you listen to me, we'll be okay, Jude's dad said calmly. We both nodded. So when we got there, it was early Sunday morning. We fished the whole day and ate what we caught. I caught my first rainbow trout. I spent a few more hours catching plenty of fish. Caught everything I dreamed of catching. Rainbows, browns, brooks, even a Tyler trout. The river was plentiful and I was proud of myself. Soon it was dark, and with the dark I remembered the radio message. Before I could remember everything said, Jude's dad called us into the cabin. When we went inside, the lights were off and the blinds were shed. Jude's dad locked all three of us in one bedroom and turned on his lantern. We're going to be in here for 2 hours and 30 minutes. I'm not chancing it, he said sternly. Dad, you're scaring me, Jude said, teary-eyed. We're going to be okay, son. Just be silent. Keep your heads down at the floor. Just trust me, he said with a soft smile. Thank God we listened to him. Seeing Jude emotional wasn't something I saw very often, so I knew he was genuinely afraid. And that's when the sounds started. First it was the footsteps from outside. First they were soft. You could barely hear them. Tap, tap, tap. The crunch from the leaves outside made the hair on my arms stand up. Tap, tap, tap. The footsteps were getting louder. I could feel Jude shaking next to me. Then there was silence. The silence was broken by the screams. Help! A woman called in agony. Please help me! The screaming continued. They're here! Please let me in! The voice cried. The voice had a dark undertone, making it sound like something was mimicking this voice. Then the banging on our front door started. Let me in! Please, I'll do anything! The woman sobbed. The banging continued for another minute. It felt like my head was being shaken around by the loud noises from the front door. This thing wanted us to believe it was an agony. And then it stopped. The silence returned. Then there were footsteps. The tapping sounded farther away. It felt like we were sitting in the silence forever, when suddenly I heard something scratching. Scratch, scratch. It came from the roof. Scratch, scratch. Don't look it up. Don't look up. Don't look up was all I could think. It stopped, then continued, then stopped. This thing was toying with us, begging us to look up at the source of the sound, begging us to check if it truly stopped. Then the radio in our room turned on. Urgent message. Lockdown has been lifted. You are free to roam again. Stay tuned in for updates, the voice from the radio said. I looked at the clock. 11:50 p.m. Jude began to stand up when his father grabbed him. He motioned him to sit still, so he did. That's when the front door burst open with a loud slam. It sounded as if the door came off its hinges. Something began slamming all its body weight on the door we were hiding behind. We all scooted back to the corner of the room. Jude followed us. Then the creature screeched in a frequency so high it hurt my ears. The door gave in. A tall black creature on all fours bent down to come into the room. Jude's dad put his hands over our mouths. I was shaking uncontrollably. The creature had strange appendages coming out of its back. It had lanky body parts, skinny arms, skinny legs, and a slim oval-shaped head. Its jaw could unhinge, revealing infinite rows of small, sharp teeth with a reptilian-like tongue. It had no eyes, and it was roaming strictly off hearing. When it couldn't find us, I watched it contort itself in a disgusting manner. The crunch of bones echoed in my ears. Right before my eyes, I watched the grotesque being turn into a beautiful woman. It had dark brown hair with a slim body. The most noticeable feature was its deep blue eyes, bluer than any ocean on earth. Then it left. Midnight came. True silence returned. In that corner, we fell asleep. When morning came, we checked out the damage. The cabin was trashed. Blood from the creature's contortion act was left in a small pool in my room. The front door was unhinged, as I suspected. The cabin next to us was less fortunate. Yellow tape was outlining the entire building, which was in worse shape than ours. When I took a glimpse inside from a distance, blood was everywhere. It covered every wall. Small bits of entrails littered the floor. Bits of flesh and brains were all over the front porch. There were no signs of life in the cabin. We packed our bags that same day. We left. That was the last day we stayed, and I told myself I would never come back. I used my phone to do research on the creature that invaded our cabin during the drive back home. When I searched river crawler, a Wikipedia page came up. The river crawlers of northern Arkansas is an urban legend from hundreds of years ago. They are said to have lived in the deepest part of Bull Shoals Lake. When the dam was opened to let water out due to flooding, the river crawlers made their way into the White River. To this day, they reside in the White River. Over time, they have adapted to technology. They can manipulate time, manipulate technology, and take the form of any human they kill. The easiest way to spot them is their abnormally blue eyes. They mostly lurk during the night. They cannot survive in sunlight for long. It burns their very thin skin, causing them to melt. I finished reading in awe. Take the form of any humans they kill. I went to the Newlands obituary. I looked up the most recent deaths in the town. There I saw her. A beautiful woman. Dark brown hair, slim body, and honey brown eyes. I'll die soon on the Whitaker Trail, but please don't send help. By G Trip 14. I'm not sure if I'll have enough signal to send this out, but it's worth a try. All of my phone calls fail as soon as I hit send, and text messages end up the same. A bar of connectivity comes in and out, but I'm not too hopeful this will be any more successful. It doesn't matter either way for me, but maybe it'll save someone else from this nightmare. If someone does happen to read this, my name is Christopher Bush, and I was born in Holmes Hollow in western Kentucky. My parents Samuel and Janice still live there. If you could pass this on, I would appreciate it. It's 3:13 a.m. Eastern Time, and I'm in a remote cabin halfway up Harlan Mountain, and it's 3 hours hike to my car at least, but I know I'll never make it. My leg is broken in at least one place, but from the various radiation points of pain, I assume it can be broken in more. Dragging myself here sapped me of the last of my energy, so I've decided to block the door with my body as best as I'm able, and just wait for the damn things to find me. Haven't heard them whispering again yet, but it's only a matter of time. It wasn't so bad when they didn't know my name, but something about hearing them rasping, "Chris," has made it so much worse. This all started 5 days ago. I left home and headed for eastern Kentucky to meet with 2 high school friends for our annual trail hike. The 3 of us weren't incredibly close anymore, but we never seemed to give up on our yearly expedition. It was an opportunity to catch each other up on the portions of our life that you don't always share on social media. Jordan and Thomas probably looked forward to it more than I did. Jordan was finishing his medical residency, and Thomas was set to take over his father's successful landscaping company. I was a college dropout working as a salesman at a used buy here pay here car lot. Jordan and Thomas were both homeowners. I live above my parents' garage in a converted apartment. Jordan and Thomas both got married. My longtime girlfriend and I are taking a break until I get my priorities together. The pattern just continued that way. It wasn't their fault I was aimless for so long of my life, but sometimes it was difficult for me to celebrate their success. Nonetheless, each year we strapped on our hiking packs and explored a new trail somewhere in the great bluegrass state. Jordan was our resident location scout, and he had come across a trail we had never heard of called Whitaker Trail. According to the little information available, it hadn't been maintained since the late 1980s. This may not seem wildly appealing to most people, but we had been hiking for so long that we began to try and find more difficult trails to increase the challenge. We had discussed section hiking the Appalachian Trail once or twice, but both Jordan and Thomas had commitments that would make it rather difficult. Finding overgrown and unkept trails was as close to a challenge as the three of us were able to come up with. After nearly 3.5 hours of driving, I pulled my old RAV4 onto the dirt road that Jordan assured me would lead me to the head of the Whitaker Trail. After some bumpy travel and a few questionable turns, I saw 2 cars parked off the side of the old road. Thomas stood behind his car waving at me, a cigar jutted out from the corner of his mouth. I put the car in park and jumped out. "Good to see you, brother," Thomas said as he walked up and gave me a quick back-slapping hug. I returned the gesture. "Looks like we missed Jordan. He left a note under his windshield that he was going to get an early start and meet us about a mile or so further up the trail." I rolled my eyes. "You'd think he wouldn't have had us haul ass across the state to go find him in the woods," I replied, half amused but still mildly irritated. I thought the point of this was to hike together. "Yeah," he said and let out a low-pitched laugh. "I guess the fast-paced ER dock life has made him a little impulsive and impatient. Ready to get moving?" I nodded and headed back to my car for my gear. We both unpacked our gear, strapped on our packs, and started heading up the mouth of the overgrown trail. The note hadn't been very informative, but it did say that Jordan would leave trail markers in the direction he was headed. Sure enough, we saw a neon yellow trail marker on an old oak tree a few feet in. I pulled it off the tree and could see it was marked "Dissolves in Water," printed on the bottom. Good old Jordan, ever the environmentalist. I struggle to afford basic necessities from time to time, and he can afford dissolving trail markers. As Thomas and I trudged up the thin and scrubby path, we had the usual conversations you have with someone you share a long history with but don't see anymore. How's the family? Is work going well? How's the significant other? Any new shows to binge on? Do you remember that time that we... Thomas shared as humbly as he could the successes he had over the past year, and I did my best to congratulate him. I shared mildly exaggerated versions of my own limited successes, and Thomas always found a way to respond in a way a proud father would. It simultaneously insulted me and made me happy to see him again. After clearing more than 3 miles of the rough trail, we continued to see the yellow trail markers, but their frequency was beginning to dwindle. To make matters worse, a light rain was beginning to fall, and would likely begin to dissolve any more markers ahead, as well as the ones behind. Jordan had gone farther ahead than he originally stated, and it was beginning to get dark. Thomas, usually patient and understanding, even began to show signs of frustration. "We should probably go ahead and set up camp here," Thomas said with a sigh. "I'd like to catch up with Jordan, but low light and the rain will make him more trouble than I think it's worth." I agreed with him, and we began to set up our tents. The rain began to increase, which drove us inside and left us to eat an unsatisfying meal of protein bars and tepid canteen water. We talked back and forth through our tents for a bit, but as the darkened night settled over us, we decided to get some sleep so we could get started early and find our over-enthusiastic friend. Settling into my sleep sack, I drifted off pretty quickly. A light rustling and squishing footsteps woke me up about 1:15 a.m., and I called out Thomas's name, but received no reply. After a few minutes and a few more wet footfalls, I called his name out again with the same result. Not sure exactly what to do, I began to slowly unzip my tent door just far enough to take a look out, but saw nothing. The wet shuffling was in between our tents and just out of eyeshot. I could hear something brushing against the nylon wall of Thomas's tent and the gentle jingle of the zipper. As the words nearly slipped out of my mouth, I stifled an additional call to Thomas. If it had been him moving around, he would have answered the first 2 calls. As quietly as I could manage, I removed my hunting knife and my flashlight from my pack. Inching back toward the zipper of my tent, I zipped it down a few inches more, but froze when I heard the muffled steps begin to make their way toward the tree line. In a moment of complete insanity, I whipped the zipper of the tent down and shot the beam of my flashlight in the direction of the steps. My light hit the back of a man walking toward the tree line. It was Jordan. His salt and pepper hair as well as the red cross tattoo on his calf were a dead giveaway. "Jordan!" I yelled at him, and he froze in place, but didn't turn around. "Friend," he croaked in a raspy voice. "Is it friend?" "Jordan," I responded quickly. Whatever the gag is, knock it off. Get in out of the rain. He rasped again. Ice was beginning to settle into my bones at his odd reply. Jordan, it's Chris, I stammered. Are you okay? Chris, he questioned as he turned around. The beam of my flashlight washed over him, revealing Jordan's face. It looked like him, anyhow. As I looked at him longer, I could see a cut below his nose that ran directly down the center of his body and into his shirt. A long seam of blood followed, and I imagined the cut continued down to his groin. Small drops of blood were beading and falling from the legs of his shorts. Yes, Chris, come. Jordan extended his hand and beckoned me towards him. The underside of his nails were dirty and speckled with blood. I pulled on my boots as Jordan continued to attempt to summon me. Knife in hand, I slid my paddle onto my shoulders and made my way out of my tent. Pointing the knife toward Jordan, I warned him not to come any closer to me. I asked him what happened, where he had been, and how did he get hurt. But he only smiled and continued to say my name in a long, drawn-out whisper as he gestured for me to come toward him. The longer I talked to the thing posing as my friend, the more I noticed other physical issues. His teeth appeared white at first, but the more often he spoke, the more I could see his gums were a grayish color, and the teeth of the gum line were black and decayed. The whites of his eyes appeared normal at a glance, but if flashlight in my shaking hand passed over them, gave them the same shard red glare that was so common in old photos. Its skin seemed to sag in places like its sweatshirt 2 sizes too large. Chris, come now, please, the thing implored. I knew I had to get out of here, so I began backing up while keeping the light trained on the thing that looked like Jordan. After I was about 30 feet away, I heard another set of footsteps sloshing through the deepening mud. Friend, something behind me rattled out. Spinning around, my flashlight fell on what first appeared to be Thomas. Immediately, I noticed the same cut under the nose, red glare in the eyes, and half-rotted smile. Friend. No! I heard the Jordan creature shriek behind me. Chris. Yes, Chris. The Thomas creature shrieked in response. Come. Without another thought, I began to run as fast as my legs would carry me. Low-hanging branches whipped and cut my face. A few hundred feet later, as I attempted to jump over a fallen log, my shoe made contact with the top. Tumbling to the ground, I lost my knife, but had no time to try and locate it. Scrambling out of the mud, I continued running blindly through the forest. The flashlight beam bounded up and down as I pumped my arms. I could hear 2 voices whispering my name beside me, overhead, behind me. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. As I continued to bound through the woods, hearing the whispers of my name easily keeping pace, the ground began to transition from mud to what felt like pebbles or gravel. Before I could assess the terrain change, my feet began to slide out from under me as the stones shifted, and I began to blindly tumble down a hill. After what felt like an eternity flipping, slamming against the ground, and scrambling to find purchase to stop my descent, I finally came to rest against a boulder at the base of the hill. As I made contact, my left leg made a sickening crack, and I was blinded with pain. Crumpled to the ground as the cold rain peppered my face, I could see the beam of my flashlight a few feet ahead. In the beam was the corner of a rustic log cabin. Good choice or not, I began to scream for help. Lying helpless on the ground, I wailed for anyone inside to come help me. I cried for them to just let me inside. No reply came. After a few minutes of sobbing, I decided I had to try and make my way to the cabin. I sat up and began to drag myself backward in the direction of the cabin. As I passed the flashlight, I picked it up and tucked it under my chin as I continued to inch toward the door. The only blessing I had come across today was that I reached up and turned the handle, and the cabin door creaked open. With the last of my strength, I pushed myself up the stairs, rolled over, and slammed the door. There was a sliding lock I managed to knock into place before collapsing against the rough wood of the door. Here I sit, waiting for daylight, or those things that look like a bastardized version of my friends. I'm beginning to hear wet footsteps outside of the cabin now, as well as indistinct murmuring. It won't be long until I hear them whispering my name again. I've done what I can for myself, so it is what it is. Something lives on the Whitaker Trail. Don't come here. It was abandoned for a reason. We just figured out why, too late. I'm a winter caretaker at a national park in Alaska. I've got some stories to share. By Dark Night Tales. I'm a seasonal caretaker at a national park in Alaska. I won't say which one, because I still value my job, and I've been warned by my employers to keep my mouth shut about anything unusual I've seen during my time here. That being said, there are some very strange things I've seen over the last 3 years that I've held this position. I figured I'd share some with you. You may not even be aware of what a seasonal caretaker is. That's completely understandable. Generally, it's not that exciting, if I'm being honest. I start my season when the park is closed for the winter, and it's my responsibility to make sure that the various cabins and public buildings are maintained, and that the snow is kept cleared from their roofs to prevent any damage, that sort of thing. It's a lonely job, and if you're a people person, it's probably not for you. It takes a bit of an odd duck to willingly put themselves into exile for 3 months at a time, knowing that there's no way out until the snow begins to melt and the plows can start clearing some of the access roads that lead out to my cabin. I do have a snowmobile that I can use to take the 3-hour trip to the nearest ranger station if I need to, but it's not like a quick trip to the corner store. It's just fine for me, though. I've always been a bit of a loner, and I have Max, my Jack Russell Terrier, to keep me company. The job isn't very demanding. I typically spend only a few days each week tending to my responsibilities, and the rest of the time is mine to do with as I please. A few years ago, I took up nature photography as a hobby to pass the time, and have even had a few of my pictures published by an organization you'd recognize by name. I have framed copies of those magazines hanging on the wall behind me right now, as a matter of fact. A lot of people come through the park during the more temperate months. It's probably one of the most popular places for outdoorsy folks to come explore in this region of Alaska. In the winter months, however, it's completely deserted, except for a few lonely ranger stations and the like. I'll go for weeks at a time without seeing a soul, and the only person I speak to with any regularity is my ranger buddy. We'll call him Rick, who I check in with a few times a week on the radio. Aside from that, it's just me and Max. I'm not sure how best to go about telling you some of the things I've seen up here in the dark, frozen days of winter, so I'll just dive right in and tell you about the shades. At least that's what I call them when I'm talking to myself. I have no idea what they really are, but when the winter storms are blowing strong against my shuttered cabin windows and the visibility in the snow and dim light are next to nothing, you'll see them. It's almost like looking at someone moving behind a pane of frosted glass, all indistinct and shadowy. At first, I just thought that my mind was playing tricks on me, finding patterns in the chaotic static of all that fallen snow. But then I started hearing them as well, like murmurings just loud enough to hear over the howl of the wind, but too quiet to recognize them as any sort of intelligent speech. It's enough to set you on edge, I can tell you that much. They tend to only show up during a heavy snowstorm, and the fiercer the storm, the closer they'll come to the cabin. It's gotten to the point where I'll make sure I've locked my doors and windows long before nightfall, if I know there's a storm coming. One time, during an especially nasty blizzard, I could actually hear them moving around my cabin, like some sort of a nightmare parade. That night was bad. At one point, I actually saw and heard the doorknob on my front door turning, all slow and deliberate, accompanied by what sounded like soft scratching at the wooden surface. The worst of it, and I'll swear on a stack of Bibles that it's the truth, was the faint whispering voice that kept calling my name just on the other side of the door. That went on for an hour or more, and even now, if I close my eyes, I can still hear that cold, hollow voice. It's what I would imagine a person would sound like if their soul were ripped out of their body. I suppose I'm being a little overly dramatic, but it's the only way I can describe it. alive, but also lifeless. I don't know a better way to explain it. No reason to dwell on it, I guess. I will say that I'm not sure what would have happened if I hadn't remembered to throw the deadbolt that night, but I'm not interested in finding out. Just thinking about it makes me anxious. I mentioned it to Rick the next day after the storm had quieted, when I could get a radio signal out. I expected him to laugh at me for letting myself get all spooked by the dark, but he didn't. He very calmly and firmly told me that it was better not to talk about them at all, and to just make sure I kept myself locked up nice and tight when the heavy snowstorms came. I tried to prod him for more information, but he just refused to elaborate any further. The only thing he would add was that not everything sleeps when winter comes on up here. I have to admit, he creeped me out more than a little with that zinger. He definitely knows something about them. I'm going to try to pin him down one day and get more information. The next thing on the list is the car graveyard. I shit you not. If you explore far enough off the beaten trail out here, chances are pretty good you'll find one. A car or truck just inexplicably deposited in the middle of backwater Alaska. Like that makes any sense at all. The first one I ever saw was an early 2000s BMW coupe, looking like it was just off the showroom floor, except for the fact that half of it was embedded in an old spruce that had probably stood there since before cars even existed. It almost looked like the tree had grown around the car, or maybe the car had been interposed into the tree. I don't know how it's possible. I just know that it was there. I've seen a few of them during my time here, sometimes trapped in the trees like that BMW, and sometimes just sitting in the middle of an open space or ground. Every one of them looked like they were fresh off the road, and none of them had any logical way they could have gotten out here, even without the whole stuck in the trees part. The most unnerving thing about the cars, though, is the clothing. I've stopped looking, and just tend to avoid going anywhere near one if I see it. But the first time I saw one, my curiosity led me to check it out. I tried to open the doors, but they were all locked. When I looked in through the windows, though, I saw the damnedest thing. In the front seats, it looked like someone had laid out clothes. Pants, shirts, socks, shoes, the whole deal. And strapped the seat belts around them. It was like the people in the car had just vanished in mid-drive, leaving their clothes behind just the way they'd been wearing them. Eerie is one word for it, but if I'm being honest, it scared the shit out of me. The other thing about the cars is that you won't find the same one twice. When I saw that first BMW, I came back out the next day with my camera to take a picture of it, but it wasn't there anymore. I thought I'd simply forgotten where it was or that I'd gotten turned around. But when I saw my boot prints in the snow from the day before, I knew I was in the right spot. I tried to report this to the rangers as well, but Rick told me they wouldn't even send anyone out to investigate them anymore. By the time anyone got there, they'd be gone. Now, verily, reports of this sort of thing have been coming in periodically over the last 20 or 30 years, and nobody knows anything about them. It did tell me that one of the rangers had found one once. A school bus from Texas, if you can believe that. In each of the rows of seats were piles of empty clothes, with the exception of the driver. The ranger that found it said that the driver was sort of there, but not really. Almost like a blurry hologram frozen in time. He said that the driver, an elderly man, looked like he was frozen in some sort of terrified scream, all wide-eyed and gaping mouth. The ranger tried to get into the bus using the rear emergency door, but when he got the door open, a loud buzzing sound filled his ears, and a high-frequency vibration ran through his body like an electric shock. He said the closer he got, the more intense the sound and sensation became. Before he could even take a step inside the bus, it grew so strong that he thought he was going to pass out. The best he could describe it was like when you have two strong opposing magnets that you're trying to push together. The more you push, the stronger the resistance becomes. He said it was almost like the universe was somehow keeping him out of the bus, like he didn't belong in it. He stumbled away from it and spent the next day in bed, sicker than a dog. When he came back out a few days later with some other rangers, the bus was gone. I can't really speak for the buzzing and vibrating personally. I just know that I avoid them whenever I see them. They're just not right. The last thing I'll tell you about today is the bridge. About a mile or so away from my cabin, along a maintained footpath, There's a rope bridge that crosses a deep ravine. To the side of it, there's a bit of rock jutting out that's used as kind of an observation point. You know what I mean, where hikers will stop and take selfies along their trail to post to Facebook or Twitter or whatever. The parks department even went through the trouble of installing handrails along the edge of it to prevent anyone from falling to their death. Of course, there aren't any hikers here during the winter season. The park is technically closed, and all roads leading into the area are blocked by chains to prevent anyone from driving in and getting into trouble with no possibility of rescue. I hike down that path probably once a week, looking for photo opportunities to occupy my time. It's a beautiful walk, and the whole landscape seems so fresh and crisp without people tropping all around it. I've gotten some incredible shots of the bridge, but I don't dare step out onto it when it's this cold, though. The boards are constantly frozen and slick with ice. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't take much of a misstep to fall on my ass and slide out from under the waist-high rope handholds. I'd be falling 200 feet to the rocks below before I even realized what was happening. Here's the weird part, though. Invariably, when I reach that bridge, I'll find multiple sets of footprints leading up to the rocky outcropping, but none of them leading away from it. They'll come from all different directions, some from the path and others straight out of the trees, but they all seem to stop at the edge of the ravine. There are various sizes and stride lengths, some of which are very small, and others are so large they had to have been made by some massive hulk of a person. The first time I saw them, I was afraid that some trespassers had gotten too close to the edge and had fallen over. But when I spent the better part of a day making my way carefully to the floor of the ravine, I couldn't find any sign that anyone had been there besides me. I'll be the first to admit that I'm no tracker, but even I can tell when footprints in fresh snow lead up to a place and don't return. I've walked out onto that outcropping myself once to see if I could figure out where all these people had gone. Maybe there was a hidden path I wasn't seeing, but the moment my foot touched that stone, my head began to throb like I was suffering from the worst hangover I'd ever had. When I staggered back from it, the pain disappeared like it had never been there, and I was left with a pretty insistent nosebleed for the rest of the afternoon as my only souvenir. I didn't try again. Max won't even go anywhere near it. He'll start whining as soon as we start approaching that part of the trail. Mind you, this is a dog that I've had to, on multiple occasions, wrestle inside the cabin because he was so incensed that a pack of wolves dared wander too close to his territory. For all of his small stature, he doesn't seem to have the self-preservation gene that tells him when he should be afraid of something. But not the overlook, though. That's a different story altogether. Even Max has his limits, I guess. I have more stories, but I'm getting a little tired, and it's about time for me to get some sleep. Tomorrow I need to head out to the cabins down by the frozen lake and make sure their roofs are clear. Maybe if you guys are interested, next time I'll tell you about the dead bears. That's a strange one. I'm a winter caretaker at a national park in Alaska, and I've got some stories to share. Part 2, by Dark Night Tales. Hey all, it's me again. First of all, wow, I didn't expect this sort of response. Thanks for all the great feedback on my previous post. Honestly, I wasn't sure how interested anyone would be in some of the things going on out here. And I was more than a little surprised when I got back to my cabin yesterday and saw all the responses. Before I get rolling with some more experiences I've had out here, I just wanted to address a few questions or comments that folks have made on my last update. Someone suggested I should try to capture the shades with my camera. That's a good suggestion, and I've already tried that on a couple of occasions. The issue I've run into is that, because of the darkness and the snow, I only really have two options. Either use a flash or some other light source, or else use a long shutter speed on my cameras. Even though I was pretty sure neither one would work, I have actually tried both methods. Unfortunately, as anyone who has driven in a snowstorm can attest, snow is great at reflecting light, which is why you can't use your high beams when driving in it. The light just reflects off the snow and back into your eyes, effectively blinding you. My results using this method were about what you'd expect, nothing but a complete whiteout of the captured images. Using a slow shutter speed didn't yield any better results. All I got were images of completely incomprehensible motion blurs. And I suppose there are probably better camera rigs out there that may be able to overcome these challenges, but I don't know of them. Even if they do exist, they're probably well outside of my budget. The National Park Service doesn't exactly pay seasonal caretakers in gold bullion. There was also a concern that, even though I'm trying to remain anonymous, I've given away enough details about myself that my employers could easily identify me. Don't worry about that. Firstly, there are more than 20 national parks in Alaska, covering over 50 million acres of land. Believe it or not, it actually contains the majority of the national park land in the entire United States, something like 65% of it. As you can imagine, there are a lot of folks spread across the state doing similar jobs to mine. It's hard to envision exactly how expansive Alaska is and how much of it is covered with stark wilderness until you've been here and seen it for yourself. I know that I didn't have the faintest clue before I got here from the lower 48. I guess the bottom line is that it's pretty unlikely that anyone from the NPS will be able to identify me from what I've told you about myself. If they do, I guess we'll cross that bridge then. Finally, someone asked about the license plates on some of the vehicles that mysteriously appear out here in the wilderness, and whether they were all from one area or from all over. I previously mentioned that I tend to avoid them if I come across them anymore, but I can tell you that the first car I ran across, the BMW, had a European-style license plate on the front. I assumed at the time it was just one of those trendy plates that folks in the US sometimes put on the front of their European cars for decoration, but it's possible that it was legitimately from somewhere in Europe. I'm not sure. I recall that it was white and blue, but beyond that I don't remember much about it. Of course, the bus that the ranger found had Texas plates on it, but I don't know about any others. Sorry. Okay, now that I've cleared those points up, let's dive into some of the other things going on out here. Since I mentioned it in my previous post, I'll start off with the bears. So, you probably already know this, but Alaska has some of the largest and most dangerous bears in the entire world. Fortunately, the Kodiak and the polar bear aren't generally found inland up here, but we still have more than our fair share of grizzlies and large black bears, both of which are apex predators and will make the quick work of the unwary or unprepared. Now, since my contract covers the colder winter months, most of these bears are hibernating during my time here. That being said, not all bears hibernate, especially if they're in an area of plentiful food supply. Also, even when they are hibernating, they'll still become active from time to time, so you definitely can't let your guard down if you want to stay on this side of the grave. It's a pretty safe bet that anyone who works out here, especially alone, tends to carry a rifle as well as a large caliber handgun whenever they're outside of their cabin. I'm no exception to that. I carry a 45-70 lever action over my shoulder and a 500 Magnum revolver on the chest holster. At first glance, it may seem like overkill. That is a tremendous amount of firepower after all. However, the first time you catch a glimpse of a mama grizzly with her cubs and realize you're looking at an 800-pound predator that can run you down in a heartbeat, you'll start wondering why I don't carry even more. The reason I mention all this isn't to give you the impression that there's some sort of mythical monsters hiding behind every tree just waiting to pounce. Only that they represent the top of the food chain up here. Period. Nothing, and I mean nothing, short of a pack of starving wolves will even threaten one. And even that's only been documented on a handful of occasions. They're massive, powerful, and aggressive. And if you live out in their territory and don't keep your head on a swivel, you're an idiot, and probably soon to be converted into bear shit. So all that being the case, I'm sure you'll understand what it means when I tell you that something is killing big grizzlies out here. I'm not talking about poachers or indigenous hunters or anything like that. I'm talking about something. As in, not humans, and definitely not hungry wolves. But let me back up a step. My first season up here as a winter caretaker was a hell of a learning experience. Just trying to figure out the necessary maintenance routines and learning to navigate around my area of responsibility was a little overwhelming. One day, I was returning from making my rounds out to one of the ranger stations that were shut down for the winter and ended up taking the wrong turn on the trail. By the time I realized my mistake, I was already a fair distance along the new path and wandering into unfamiliar territory. Just as I was getting ready to turn around and retrace my steps, I topped a rise and was suddenly faced with the unmistakable form of a grizzly, not 30 feet along the path ahead and facing away from me. I've got to tell you, I almost pissed myself as I fumbled to unsling the rifle from my shoulder. It's a damn good thing I didn't actually need it at that moment, because I discovered to my dismay that I had stupidly slung my shoulder pack over top of the rifle sling, effectively trapping it against my body. Stupidity and complacency are what get you killed out here, folks, and I could have been a perfect example of both at that moment. As it turns out, the bear wasn't moving. It was just standing there perfectly still, its hindquarters facing me, and I knew instinctively that something was wrong with it. Giving up on my rifle, I grabbed my handgun from its holster and cautiously approached the grizzly, my eyes intent on the bear and prepared for the slightest hint of movement. The closer I got to it, though, the more certain I became that it wasn't going to suddenly lunge at me and give me a lesson on exactly where on the food chain I placed. Here's where it gets surreal. Before I got too close to it, I had already recognized that it was dead. What I couldn't explain was why it was still standing. It had clearly been there for a while, as there were no paw prints leading up to it in the snow, and as I rounded to the front of it, I could see the flesh around its muzzle was already starting to decompose and pull back from its skull. When I got a good look at it, I could also see that it was missing tufts of fur here and there. Despite all that, it was still standing, like it had died and just forgotten to fall down. I looked it over pretty closely, which was still an unnerving exercise, dead or not, but I couldn't find any sort of wounds or blood that might indicate why it had died. It was then that I realized a couple of things. Firstly, that there were grizzlies in the area that were active. And secondly, nothing had scavenged the carcass. To say this is unusual is an understatement. Most of the top carnivores in this area, including wolves, wolverines, and foxes, supplement their diets by scavenging on carrion. The fact that this bear had died and remained completely intact wasn't just perplexing. It was unnatural. I reported the find to the ranger station, then heard back later from Rick that there had been nearly a dozen other similar discoveries within that general area in the last 2 months. The NPS had even brought in some fancy zoological pathologists from Anchorage to figure out what had killed the bears. They spent 2 weeks in the field with the rangers examining the carcasses, and then one morning they were just gone. They'd apparently been abruptly recalled without so much as a by your leave. Immediately after that, the carcasses were destroyed and the investigation shut down. A week later, a rushed, astonishingly brief report came back indicating death by natural predation. No further investigation indicated. Natural predation. I'm not sure how a predator could have killed the bear I found without leaving a single mark on it or trace of blood, let alone somehow keep it standing upright after death, and then deciding it wasn't even going to feed on the kill. I call bullshit, and so did the rangers. Rick told me his boss had tried to contact the pathologist for more information, but was told that they had all been reassigned and were no longer working with the Park Service. Not one to easily give up, Rick's boss tried calling a private cell number he had gotten from one of the pathologists during their visit. It went to a disconnected message indicating the phone was no longer in service. This was strange, because he had just spoken to the investigator using that very number only a couple weeks prior, so he knew it was a good number. But, late that night, he received a call from an unknown caller. When he answered it, he recognized the hushed voice of the pathologist he had befriended, sounding like they were whispering into their phone. "Leave it alone. Forget about it," was all they said before the line went dead. He tried calling the number back several times, but it just went to dead air each time. That was the last time he heard anything about it. He tried following up within the NPS, but somehow nobody was able to find records that such an investigation had ever existed, or even that any reports of the dead bears had been filed in the first place. Rick told me that, for a while, it was all his boss wanted to talk about. It had become like a splinter in his hand that he couldn't ignore. He called anyone he could think of in the chain of command at the NPS, and any other agencies he thought might be able to provide some clue about what was going on, but couldn't make an inch of headway. Then, one day, He just stopped talking about it, like a switch had been thrown. One evening, Rick and his boss were having beer at a local bar after their shift and talking about how strange the whole thing was. And then the next morning, his boss walked in, looking a little shakily and out of sorts, went into his office and closed the door, and didn't say 2 words to Rick that day. He never mentioned the incident again. A few times Rick had brought it up in conversation with him later on, and his boss just brushed the whole thing off and changed subjects, looking very uncomfortable about the whole thing. I don't know what happened, but if I had to guess, I'm thinking that his boss was probably digging into something that wasn't meant to be dug into, and someone had convinced him that it was better if he just forgot about it. Look, I'm not some conspiracy theorist nutjob, okay? I just know the whole thing stinks to high hell, and I'll just leave it at that. The other thing I'll tell you about today is what we call the Witch's Lodge. I'm not sure what it was originally. It's really not much more than a single-room log cabin built out in the deep bush. I've seen it a couple of times and been inside once. It's a bit of a hike from my post and not somewhere easily traveled, even by snowmobile, so I don't get out that way very often. Old abandoned cabins aren't really that unusual up here. You'll trip across them from time to time, although most are much more than a few walls and a collapsed roof after the years and harsh Alaskan winters get through with them. The Witch's Lodge is a little different, though. As far as I'm aware, nobody's lived there for a long time, but whoever built it must have known what they were doing, because it looks every bit as solid and maintained as my own cabin. I'm not even sure how it got its name, honestly. I just know that's how it was introduced to me the first time, so that's how I'm introducing it to you. A couple of years ago, my ranger buddy Rick radioed me up asking me if I wouldn't mind joining him in a search for a couple of missing hikers, the father and his 12-year-old son. I'm just a caretaker. I don't normally participate in ranger or search and rescue related activities, but apparently there wasn't anyone else available to accompany him on that day, and he had gotten a lead that the hikers may have been heading into my section of the park. In S&R efforts, especially during the dark Alaskan winters, finding someone quickly is critical if you want to find them alive, so he wanted to follow up on it sooner than later. Of course, I couldn't exactly refuse to help him, especially not when one of them was a kid. So, a couple hours later, I found myself trailing behind him through the knee-deep snow. We moved along a semi-familiar path for a while before he turned left at a fork, and we started making our way along another that I wasn't familiar with. He seemed like he knew where he was headed, like he had a particular destination in mind, though, and we really didn't talk much during the hike. We stopped a couple of times to rest and sip some hot coffee from our thermoses, but even then, we were both quiet. I think there was some sort of dark cloud hanging over his mood. I could see it in his narrowed eyes and drawn brow. It was infectious and soon started manifesting itself in the back of my own mind. An hour later, we came upon the place. I was surprised to see this perfectly preserved little cedar log cabin just sitting out here among the trees and looking for all the world like someone would come walking out of the front door at any moment. Something about the place seemed off, though. Somehow, I knew that nobody lived there, that nobody had lived there in a long time. I can't explain it, but at that moment I had this strange feeling that we weren't welcome here, like something was telling me to turn around and head back while I still could. Before I had the chance to open my mouth about it, Rick turned to me and pointed towards the closed front door, where I could clearly see the boot prints at its threshold. "Come on," he said over the wind that had just blown up, and I could see the grim set to his expression before he turned away from me and started making his way towards the door. I noticed that he had drawn his handgun, so I did the same, though I had no idea why. We reached the entryway to the cabin, and he put his hand on the latch. Before he lifted it, he paused and looked back at me with that same dark expression. "We're going to have a look inside," he said. "If there's nothing to be found in there, fine. We'll just turn around and head back to your cabin for a couple of glasses of whiskey by the fire. Maybe the other groups will find them then." He fixed his eyes hard on mine, like he wanted to make sure I was paying damn good attention to him. "But if we find anyone other than this idiot hiker and his kid inside, we're not going to look at them, and we're not going to say a single word to them. Understand? Even if they talk to us first." I nodded at him, more confused than anything else. But that wasn't good enough. "I need you to say it, John, to make sure you understand what I'm telling you," he said, and the set of his eyes was so serious and determined that I repeated his instructions back to him without a second thought. What I did, he gave a brief nod and lifted the latch, pushing the door inward. We stepped through the doorway into the darkened room beyond. As soon as we did, I was overwhelmed by the stench of decay, mixed with the strong sense of herbs and something else, something sickly, riding just under the surface of all that. My eyes had just started to adjust to the dim light of the interior, and I was able to make out the sparse furnishings of the room. An old rickety table with a solitary low-back chair in front of a cold stone fireplace. Along the far wall, I thought I could just make out a cot, but I couldn't be sure. "Damn it, it's happened again," said Rick, almost under his breath, and the tone of warning in his voice drew my attention immediately. I turned to find him kneeling next to the desiccated husk of a man's body, dressed in gray snow pants and a red down jacket, slumped back against the wall. It looked like he had been there for years. I stumbled backwards in shock without even realizing it. "What the shit?" I exclaimed, not really knowing what else to say. Rick picked up something that was resting on the floor near the man's skeletal hand, looked around briefly at the room, then nodded to the door. "Time to go. I'll let the S&R team know that we found the hikers," he said. I was more than a little confused. The body we were looking at was almost mummified. It had clearly been there a long time, and I told him as much. Not to mention the fact that there was only one of them. If it was possible that this was the father, that still meant that the son was somewhere out here. "It's too late, John," was all he said, pressing something into my hands as he passed me and stepped out the door. I looked down and realized I was holding a small notebook, like the kind a person might keep in their pocket just in case they needed to write something down. Numbly, I flipped it open. It was mostly empty except for the first 2 pages, which were scrawled in a sloppy cursive in pencil. I don't have it anymore, so this is going to be as well as I remember it. It should be close enough that you get the gist of it. "We found her cabin. God, I wish we hadn't. Nathan's gone. She took him. I've been wandering around in here for days, but I can't find my way out. I haven't seen Nathan or her since that first day. My boy is gone. How can I not find my way out? What's happening?" I can hear her whispers taunting me, but it's always just a little farther forward, around the next corner. I don't understand any of this. I'm so sorry. As it turns out, we did end up heading back to my cabin. Rick radioed the S&R team that he'd found the hikers in the lodge, and the person on the other end paused a long moment before replying with a simple acknowledgement. No questions, nothing else, just "Acknowledged, Rick." We didn't say much to each other that night. We just sat in front of my fire and drank the rest of my Jameson until we both passed out. When I returned to consciousness the next morning, Rick had already gotten up and left. We hadn't spoken about it since that day. The notebook was gone when I awoke, so I assume he took that with him. Clearly he knows something about what happened, about that cabin, but I've never asked him about it. Not too sure I really want to know. It's hard enough to sleep at night out here sometimes. Speaking of which, I suppose it's time for me to sign off and get some shut-eye. It's already almost 2 a.m., and I've got a long day's work ahead of me tomorrow. It snowed pretty good today, and I was already behind in clearing the roof of the storage sheds over near the old fire watch tower. I'd rather not have to deal with the damage if the roof collapses, so I'd better get over there as soon as it lets up some outside. I'll write some more soon. Good night, all. I'm a winter caretaker at a national park in Alaska, and I've got some stories to share. Part 3, by Dark Night Tales. I'm back again, but I think this may be my last post. It sounds like it may have attracted the attention of someone I didn't intend to, and after this update, I'm going to lay low and try to disappear. Let me bring you up to speed. First thing this morning, as I was getting suited up and ready to head down to the storage sheds near the old fire watchtower, I heard a knocking on the door to my cabin. Being in the middle of a closed national park in the heart of an Alaskan winter, you can imagine I don't get very many visitors. About the only people I even see out here is my ranger buddy Rick, and the guy who brings me fresh supplies every few weeks. Rick has never just shown up at my door without calling on the radio first, and I know he's had his hands full recently with a few separate incidents of missing hikers and one self-professed cryptozoologist, so I was surprised to hear his muffled voice calling my name through the locked door. When I opened it and ushered inside, I saw immediately the concern set to his expression. Without a word, he stepped over to the fireplace and warmed his hands in front of the freshly smoldering log I had just added. "Hell, Rick, you gave me a bit of a start," I told him with a small chuckle, trying to light the air a bit. Something was up, and I had a sinking feeling that it might have something to do with me. He turned away from the fire and looked at me a long moment in silence before speaking. "I got a call last night, John," he said. His face was creased with a frown. I couldn't tell whether it was one of worry or muted anger or maybe a combination of both. "Oh yeah?" I replied, trying to keep the tone as casual as I could. He pulled the wool cap off his head and ran a hand over it, smoothing out his short, neatly trimmed hair. "Yeah, and so did a few other rangers, apparently." I nodded until I sipped from my coffee, feeling more uncomfortable by the moment. "What about?" "What do you think?" "It was about you," he said, pointing at me with his cap. "You've attracted someone's attention with your little stories that you've been posting online." "My stories? What stories?" I said evenly, feigning innocence. I hadn't discussed these posts with Rick since I started updating him. Sure, we've chatted about the possibility of me doing some in the past, but I haven't told him that I'd actually written them. As far as he knew, I was just blowing smoke. My palms began to sweat, despite the fact that my cabin's internal temperature was probably in the low 50s, even with the fire in the hearth. I'd been so sure that there was no way the NPS, or the agency, or anyone else could figure out who's been writing these posts. I didn't stop to consider that they didn't need to figure it out themselves. All they needed to do was to start poking around at the rangers in the various areas. See, there's no way that anyone who wasn't intimately familiar with this area could have identified it just by the details I've given. I've even made sure to change the names of the places and alter the descriptions of some of the events a little, just to try to make it that much more impossible for anyone to figure out exactly who or where I was. In retrospect, my mistake was obvious. If I was trying to identify the source of these posts, I'd probably go directly to the rangers who knew the territory even better than I do. I made the mistake of thinking that my friendship with Rick was strong enough for him to look the other way, to cover my ass. See, the Witch's Lodge isn't really known by that particular name around here. I just made that up as an alias for its real one. But I'm sure Rick would be able to identify it immediately by reading what I've written about it. The same goes for the other stories, too. And I'm also pretty sure that the other rangers would be able to recognize them for what they really were as well, now that I'm thinking about it. Shit. I fucked up good this time. Okay, so here's the deal. There are things that happen out here, more than I've told anyone about. More than I was ever planning on alluding to in these posts. Things that they do out here. And things they definitely do not want anyone to know about. I thought I was being so clever by sharing this with you all and disguising the details enough that they couldn't be deciphered and traced back to me. Fuck! Rick tilted his head at me and gave me one of those looks that told me he wasn't in the mood for any games right now. "You know the stories I'm talking about, John," he said in a flat tone. "The ones I've told you time and again were a bad idea. The ones I told you were going to get you into trouble." I tried to shrug it off, downplay it. "Hell, there were just a few stories on the internet, Rick. I was just having a little fun. It gets lonely out here. We go stir-crazy sometimes. You know that." "Yeah, well, these stories have stirred up trouble for us both," he said, setting his hat on the chair and turning away from me back towards the fireplace. "They know who wrote them. They know who you are." I just stood there in shocked silence, mouth hanging open as I stared at my friend's back, sudden comprehension flooding my thoughts. My eyes grew wide. You told him? I asked, stunned. How could I have been so naive? Rick had a job to do. We all had jobs to do out here. We all had people we answered to. We all knew the score. He didn't turn to face me, but I could see his head fall a little in resignation. His face was probably twisted up in frustration at my recklessness, at the position I'd put him in, if I had to guess. I hope there was a little regret there, too. I'd like to think that our friendship had been real enough. What did you expect? That they'd just look the other way again? This isn't the first time you've pulled this shit, John, he said, glancing over his shoulder at me. I could see the darkness in his eyes at that brief moment, the resolve that had turned his features to stone, and I knew what was coming. The crackling of the flames from the fireplace almost covered the quiet sound of a fastener being unsnapped, but not quite. He was quick, but I had the advantage. Before he even had the chance to spin around to face me, my magnum was out of its holster and thundering with unimaginable violence in the small confines of my cabin. The air filled with acrid smoke, and the afterimage of the muzzle flash glowed in my eyes, superimposed over the dim firelight. Rick staggered to his left, his own handgun fallen to the floor as he reached up to clench at the blackened hole in the chest of his jacket, which was now already growing red with the terrible wound beneath. He looked at me, and I could see the realization in his eyes of what had just happened. He reached out to steady himself against the mantel, gasping for breaths that now had a horrible wet rattle to them. I'm sorry, Rick, I said, grabbing my pack from beside the door and slinging my rifle over my shoulder with trembling hands. I screwed it all up. I'm sorry about all this. He didn't hear me, though. He'd slumped to the floor and now stared vacantly at nothing, his blood pooling and spreading from beneath him across the wooden planks. He was gone. That was this morning. I took off out of my cabin as quickly as I could and strapped my pack onto the snowmobile. Within a couple minutes, I was speeding along the northern trail, away from my cabin and in the direction of the decommissioned ranger station. I'd killed my friend. He would have killed me if I hadn't acted first, I know. But that doesn't change anything. I've never used my gun to kill anything, man or beast. It was always something that was there if I needed it, like a security blanket. But I never really thought I'd have to pull the trigger on anything. Fuck! I'd made a mess of this whole thing. I thought it was over for me when I started a little too close to the edge back in Montana. But fortune had smiled on me, and the powers that be decided to give me another chance then. There wouldn't be another pardon for me this time. I'm sitting here in the back room of the old ranger station. I've concealed my snowmobile around back, covered by a tarp and whatever snow I could throw over top. It's starting to snow again outside, so I'm hoping that my tracks will be obscured before too long. Maybe it'll buy me some time. Just enough time to get some of this out there, to allow me to post some of the truth. I have no delusions about my capabilities. I'm just a caretaker. My training was cursory at best. I'm certainly no match for their teams. My name, my real name, is John Wright. I do actually work for the U.S. government, but not for the National Park Service. At least, not really. I'm not going to name the organization that I work for, not because I'm afraid that they'll find out. It's too late for that now. But because their Raptor AI protocols will identify and censor this entire post before it has the chance to proliferate if I do. Once the post gets out and starts bouncing around to various servers, it's much more difficult for them to make it go away. My job here is mostly what I've told you. That part's true. But that's mostly just busy work, my cover, if you will. Primarily, I'm responsible for keeping an eye out for trespassers who wander a little too close to their facilities, or things that have escaped from them, or unintended byproducts of whatever the fuck they're doing in there. I don't really know what goes on under the mountain, and I'm sure I wouldn't understand it even if I did. What I do know is that I'm pretty sure those cars that just appear out of nowhere, hundreds of miles from anywhere they have any business being, are from one of those byproducts. The shades? Hell, I don't know. Escapees, maybe? I don't even know what I hope to accomplish by writing all this down. Maybe it's my way of making it right. Maybe I just want to make sure there's something left of me for anyone to remember. When I was posted here 3 years ago, I saw the entrance to the facility. It's about 10 miles from my cabin, bored directly into the base of a mountain. I have no idea how big it is inside or how many people are in there, but I know that there are a lot of big military helicopters flying in and out at the beginning and end of my seasons here. I assume they're transporting researchers or equipment or whatever. It just hit me, and if Rick had shown up at my door a half hour earlier, I would have been just finishing my breakfast instead of fully geared up and ready to head out the door for the day. I wouldn't have had my holster strapped to my chest, and I'm certain I'd be the one laying in a pool of my own blood right now. Fuck! Concentrate, damn it. I don't have time for this. I don't know what the communication protocol was that Rick was supposed to follow after he took care of me, but I assumed someone was waiting for his report to confirm that I'd been silenced. I have to believe that, by now, they know something has gone wrong. There's probably a team at my cabin right now. It hasn't been snowing long enough to cover my tracks, unfortunately, which means they'll probably have no trouble figuring out which direction I took. It's only a matter of time before they show up here. Then it's all over. Right now, I'm typing this on my notebook computer and relaying it through the ranger station's communications network. I'm surprised they haven't locked down the firewalls yet. I fully expected to be completely cut off from the world when I got here. Small blessings, I guess. At least I can get this out there still. You've probably gathered by now that most of the rangers around here aren't what they seem either. Some are, I think. But most are ex-military, special forces types, recruited by the agency to provide security and make sure the caretakers don't go off the reservation, like I did. Rick was that way. His real name is Mike, by the way. I won't tell you his last name. I don't want him remembered as anything other than a hero. I'm the one that fucked this whole thing up. He was just doing his job, fulfilling his sworn commitment. He was an honorable man, and that's how I want him remembered. My nerves are starting to get the better of me. I just took a look outside because I thought I heard something. I don't think they can get here this quickly, so I'm thinking it was just my imagination. Look, this isn't something isolated to Alaska. They have research facilities all over the U.S. The last one I was at was in Montana, but I know there are others spread across the states. Wyoming, Texas, Kentucky, South Dakota. Hell, they're everywhere. They like to build them in national parks, especially those with huge areas of wilderness. It ensures a reasonable amount of privacy, without drawing the sort of attention to it that places like Groom Lake and Cheyenne Mountain have done. Those two places are basically tourist attractions at this point. But man, once they tried out Alaska, it was like they hit the jackpot. The whole area is so remote and uninhabited that they were virtually guaranteed isolation and secrecy to do whatever it is they're doing in there. Did I tell you about the man I found once, half integrated into a boulder? I don't think so. He was wearing a lab coat, but the only parts of him that were accessible were his right arm and shoulder and the back of his head. The rest of him was somehow inside of it, which was probably for the best. I'm sure he died pretty quickly. I called that one in, and they had a team out there within an hour. I left once they arrived, but when I came back a couple days later, the whole boulder was gone, and the landscape had been made to look like it had never been there. I'm talking about a rock the size of a small house, just gone. Bear's story is true, by the way. The only difference is that it was us who covered the whole thing up. That one scares the shit out of me, because that thing is still roaming out there somewhere. They were never able to find it. Hell, they lost a dozen men just trying. Same story as the bears, by the way. We found the teams down near the runoff gully, just standing there, dead. You've never seen a nightmare until you've seen a dozen armed corpses just frozen in place. By the time we found them, they weren't much more than gray skins stretched tight over skeletons. But there they stood, looking like some goddamn zombie army out of a horror movie. I saw it once, I think. The thing that did it. It was about the size of a tall, thin man, but the shape was all wrong. The joints bent in strange ways, and the head was something that reminded me of a praying mantis. It was covered in black and gray mottled skin that looked sort of like scales, but not quite. I don't know, I'm just a caretaker. I came across it while making my rounds one day. It was clamped onto the back of one of those big grizzlies, arms and legs wrapped around it like it was some sort of monstrous insect or something. The bear was just standing there, making the most god-awful screams you've ever heard, like he was being burned alive or something. But he wasn't moving. It was just standing there perfectly still while this thing did whatever it was doing, feeding on the bear somehow, I guess. I hid behind a tree and nearly pissed myself. I thought for sure it was going to hear my panic breathing and come for me next, but it didn't. Eventually, the bear stopped making that terrible crying sound and went quiet. A few minutes later, this thing unwraps itself from around the grizzly, takes a few steps towards a big pine tree, and just vanishes. Only, it didn't really vanish. I nearly stepped out from behind the tree to take a closer look at the bear when I realized I was still looking at that thing. Only its skin had camouflaged itself perfectly to its background, taking on the exact coloring and pattern of the snow-covered pine. I mean, perfectly. The only reason I was able to see it was because part of it, one of its appendages I think, was slightly protruding away from the tree. It was this break in the shape of the tree that caught my attention, and probably saved my life. I must have stood there for another hour before it finally took a step away from the tree, its surface returning to the black and gray splashes of color. When it moved, it was like a stalking spider, slow and deliberate, graceful and ungainly all at the same time. It was a fucking nightmare is what it was. It took a few steps closer to the bear, like it was trying to figure out whether this was some new prey or whether it was already used up. Like it had forgotten about it and was just looking for its next meal. After that, it glided on down the trail without a sound, thankfully in the opposite direction of my hiding spot. I waited another hour before daring to move an inch, and when I did, I hauled ass back to my cabin, locked the door, and radioed the whole thing into Mike. They sent a team out, but never found anything other than the bear, which they very quickly made disappear. While I'm sharing my sins, by the way, the real rangers, the ones that originally found the dead bears and reported it to the NPS, well, you won't find them anymore. There were 3 of them that worked with the researchers, just like I said in my story. But a week after the researchers left, all 3 of those rangers somehow wandered off the trail during a snowstorm and died of hypothermia. Yeah, right, hypothermia. You'd think that the agency could at least use a little imagination when they came up with these stories. I know this whole thing took a sudden sharp right turn on you guys, and I'm sorry about that. I'm out of time though. No more time for pretexts or lies. The bottom line is, you're better off staying out of the parks. Go see a movie, go for a drive, play video games, whatever. I suppose even state parks are probably safe enough, and I wouldn't chance it. The shit I've seen. What they've done. Okay, I'm pretty sure that wasn't my imagination that time. Time to upload the post. If I'm mistaken and I have more time, I'll just send an update. And I want to make sure this gets out there before they stop it. Signed, John Wright, former seasonal caretaker for an Alaska National Park.